What's going on, guys? Welcome to Creative Conversations. This is a podcast where I call my most creative friends and we have a discussion regarding, well, creative stuff. So if that sounds interesting, enrich your ears. And today we have Santiago, who is an established director of photography and director here in Los Angeles. Let's dive into becoming a professional director of photography. And we start this off by talking about the power of collaboration.
It was, a lot of people from USC, a lot of people from UCLA that had just graduated were the people I started collaborating with. And actually, one of the first collaborators, which is, her name is Hannah Dickinson. Like, a lot of these people I've collaborated with have gone on to, especially actors, have gone on to, really fruitful careers. Like, for example, Hannah Dickinson, she was in one of the first sketches I co-directed with my former writing partner. And she's now, the face of Comedy Central's web. So you can go on Comedy Central's Instagram page, and she's like a raunchy, younger comedian, and she came up through the sketch comedy world.
Real quick, before you kind of go into how your career evolved, can you talk about the importance of taking those gigs and collaborating with people at that certain level and then keeping those relationships throughout the years and how that's helped? I
think that's actually the one most important thing to really mention on this podcast, which is that, when I was in college, I was not the popular DP. I was not even honestly, I wouldn't say they laughed at me, but it was already tied up. By the time that I wanted to be a DP or fully commit to directing, because my first year of college, I was still kind of figuring it out. I'd made films in high school. I was very successful, but I was kind of running from it because I was worried I wouldn't be able to make money, which is stupid. But anyway, I was there, right? And college really kind of jump started me because I just was I couldn't stand. I was like, dude, I wasn't popular in that respect. So then what happened was I said, okay, I'm doing this. And I actually had a mentor who really believed in me, kind of approached me, and I was in his class. And it's a funny story because he was saying all these really dirty jokes in class. And I was one of the only people laughing at the jokes. And I'm like, this guy's hilarious. He's making these dirty jokes, and people and when I say dirty jokes, it was light sex jokes and light,
but witty,
Yeah, but witty. It never really crossed the line. He got really close to crossing the line, but he never crossed the line. And I think that's what comedy's about. It's knowing really close to that line and then not crossing it, saying something.
Or knowing when to cross it slightly and then pull it back,
Yeah, exactly. So he would do that. And so I laughed at his jokes, and I didn't even know who this guy was. I was just it's just a funny old, Hollywood guy. I had no idea that he had won 9 Emmys. I had no idea that he directed Mark Hamill doing voiceovers. I mean, this guy's directed Malcolm McDowell doing voiceover. I mean, he had a very successful children's show. He won 9 Emmys for it. And so anyway, he looked me in the eye one day. We were smoking a cigarette outside. He was smoking a cigarette. He's like, dude, you're going to join my class next year. Yeah. He was like, you're going to join my class next year, kid. And I'm like, am I? And he's like, dude, you're doing it. And it's really important because this class is the model production class, right? So it was a production class at college that basically emulated the film environment. And my professor was very much an outside the box kind of guy. So my mentor, right? So he was very much a lot of people hated him. A lot of people thought he was a bad professor. A lot of people shunned him. They thought he was a really bad guy because he was really rough around the edges. He wasn't a very thorough teacher. He would forget about reports. He would forget about grading stuff. He was just kind of a very typical old guy that is the absent-minded professor. He's a genius, but he just doesn't care that much about procedure.
Not by the books, but there are hidden qualities that eventually that you kind of got onto.
Yes. That was kind of the beginning of where a lot of stuff took off. It was because, and I firmly believe this, it was because I wasn't snobby about what kind of work I was taking. There were a lot of people, and I'm not going to name any names, but there were a lot of people that would not work on anything if it was not a narrative short film. They would not work. They were too good for it. It was I don't do that. And I'm like, all right. So what I did was I was playing the long game. And again, here I am. I'm not, the most successful, but I did have some measurable success because of this. And what I did was I started doing documentary pieces for them. And I actually ended up running the class for 2 semesters. And we ended up making the class upwards of $10,000 collecting from different projects we had done. So you understand, this is a really cool opportunity for people to get their feet wet. And it wasn't glorious though. It wasn't you had all the film kids that were like, you know, God bless them, but they only wanted to work on short films. And I will say this is very important. It's like, I get being selective once you have some clout, but if you have no clout, you cannot be
Right.
selective.
So that's super, super important. I want to touch on that just a little bit more. Like just when, especially when you're starting out, you have dreams, obviously. You have a defined thing that is that's on the pedestal of where you want to be. But but it's almost like you have to be so willing to get your hands dirty and help out in any capacity if an opportunity comes up. And it seems like that's what kind of you're talking about in terms of just, hey, this is the need and I'm going to do this really well to build relationships with people. And through those different opportunities, I'm sure you've learned a ton of different things.
Absolutely. And adding to that, if you just come out here and you're smart and you mean business and you're not f***ing around, like people will notice. And I think a lot of people get discouraged because they're like, oh, well, my friend went out there and didn't succeed. Well, it's like, okay, well, how aggressive were they about, doing that? So for example, all the people that PA'd and all the people that actually like were willing to think outside the box, which is what you're doing too. I mean, you're thinking outside the box. You're starting your own podcast. You're like building, you're not relying on like somebody to give it to you. You're like, great. If somebody wants to give it to me, awesome.
Yeah,
but
dude.
I'm going to build it.
I love that you notice that because it's not like an intentional thing in terms of, hey, look at me, look what I'm doing. It's work ethic. It's dedication. It's saying that I'm going to do this no matter what. And I'm going to try to create my own opportunities because this is what I want to do. And this is what I'm going to do, So
exactly. Yeah. And you just do it. And then here we are. I mean, like 3 years ago, right? Or whatever, 2 years ago, you were just Fullscreen and you were just in LA and it was like, oh, everything's new. I mean, and now you've blossomed into doing all this other work and you can see how it happened, right? It was like, you just took the job. And you had a really good job, by the way, which was like working on a sketch comedy show. Like that was awesome.
Yeah, that was awesome. Wait, real quick, can I tell you the story of how I actually got in the door of Fullscreen?
Was it Stacy?
So no, it was a girl named Michaela, and Michaela.
Yeah.
So here's actually how it all came to be. I'm going to try to condense this because it's a super elaborate story. But one of the editors went on vacation for his honeymoon. His name was Ed. You know Ed. So it was a 10-day window where Michaela brought me in to meet the post-production head, Burley, and he was like, hey, we have this role that's basically 10 days. I want to get an editor in here while Ed was out on his honeymoon. So I just started working. I'm young and I'm nervous and I'm just like chipping away at all these video projects. And then it must have been day 5 or 6. And Burley just came up to me. He's like, hey, listen, like we need the extra help around here. You're doing a great job. Like you can just stay. And at this time I was only subletting a room in Los Angeles for 1 month at the time. So I'm like, oh, I guess I live here now. And flash forward like 3 years now. I've been here ever since. And it just goes to show that like, if you put yourself in situations intentionally that you never know what could happen. And if something doesn't happen, just keep doing it.
Yeah. And right. And it's like Burley met you and he was like, oh, he's smart. Like, and not to delineate, but like, you know what you're doing. Like you're a conscious person that like knows how to use the program. Like it's going to work. It's going to be fine. Like just people need to believe in themselves and you believe in yourself. And I think I see that happening a lot where people won't believe in themselves and they'll kind of like downplay themselves. And it's like, dude, you just got to get in the room. By the way, Burley, he actually, so it's so funny that he hired you, right? Like it's all I'm remembering all this because I was there for all that, right?
Yeah.
And I remember he actually was the guy he was the first guy I met when I actually got my job with Andy way back in the day. So
Other Andy,
Burley,
not me.
I actually got in the same way you did, which was Burley was my first boss.
Yeah.
So I remember it was the same thing. I remember shaking his hand, be like, dude, this guy's got long hair, looks like Thor.
He looks really cool. Those of you who don't know Burley, he's the dude from The Big Lebowski, essentially embodied.
Yes. Yeah. And he's a Texan that came out here and is just like
nicest guy I've ever met in my life too. Just
so accomplished.
Yeah.
He worked on I think he worked on Sons of Anarchy. He also worked on a bunch of really big shows. He's sold shows. Dude, he's such a cool guy. So that's crazy that that all worked out
Yeah.
like that.
Well,
But
it's full
I kind of
circle
think
of
that was
just
happening.
exactly like what you were saying earlier. It's the willingness to make those connections, get your hands dirty, and just learn from people and absorb everything.
Same thing with Stacy too. I mean, she came in when somebody was on vacation, and she ended up staying because that person ended up wanting to go and live back with their family and wherever they were.
Yeah.
So
Moral of the
yeah,
story is
man.
you never know what could happen.
And then she was producing for Mute Six. So I mean, it's crazy. So yeah, it's very definitely inspirational. And there are tangible steps people can take to get in there, and I think that people just need to believe in themselves.
Is there
Yeah.
anything you would say to lock in work and grow from that?
Yeah.
Like in terms of consistency, I guess what I'm trying to say is because a lot of people are like, all right, I have some skills. I'm not the best DP yet. And
Right.
I have a lot to learn, but can I go out and make money doing this, first of all? And how do you build a consistent job market when it's just like you and a camera essentially?
Yeah, I mean it's interesting, right? It's like there's a couple ways to go about it. Number one, I would think like the most important thing of all is like to really understand, and this is so obvious, but it's like to really know what good lighting is. Like really spend some time studying with some of these great instructors. There's a ton of classes online. I mean, I learned a shit ton from just watching YouTube videos and downloading master classes.
Yeah, masterclass. I would say another really good tool just for anyone that's listening that's interested in studying lighting. Indie Mogul has a YouTube channel, and they do.
Sure.
You should check it out if you haven't. But they have like lighting breakdowns with like professional DPs, and it's really, really good content.
Shane Hurlbut also too. I gotta give Shane some credit.
Yeah.
Shane, in my view, has some of the most compellingly like the cool thing about Shane is like Shane has done so many legendary feature films, and you look at his films like Semi-Pro, you look at his films like The Greatest Game Ever Played, or I mean, they're not like the biggest films, but like he's the guy that Christian Bale yelled at, right? So it's like people, he knows what he's doing. And when I started watching Shane's lessons, there was a confidence I had because this is a guy that is literally like there's nobody that's really higher up. Like, okay, maybe Roger Deakins, maybe, but like, I mean, Shane Hurlbut is basically old school professional's professional. I mean, he's filmed Guns N' Roses music videos. I mean, this guy's like legendary. So it's cool because that info's out there. And once I started really understanding that and like studying his methodology more, and then actually getting to the place where I physically met him, I was physically studying with him, like at their little ranch and stuff like that. That's when my knowledge just totally catapulted into the next stratosphere, where like I was able to throw around that knowledge and get a ton of like, it put me ahead of a lot of people because a lot of people just don't know. And it's like, once you figure out the techniques of like what these professionals are doing, like what Libatique is doing, it sounds really arrogant, but like, I really believe this, which is like, if you look at these huge DPs, to be honest with you, it's really not that impressive to me. It's really not. I mean, it's cool. It's good shit. But because I've studied Shane, because I've seen and I've been studying for a long time, it's just not a mystery anymore. It's not like, I wonder, how could they possibly have come up with this? They're such geniuses. It's like, yeah, they're geniuses. And I'm not knocking these DPs. They're geniuses, obviously.
There's a certain level of understanding what goes on behind the scenes that kind of changes how your brain thinks about production. And you kind of, once you're like, it's the same thing with anything, right? Like, even if you take like, all right, so a poor college student a couple of years later is getting full-time income. And now that money doesn't seem so big anymore, right? It's kind of like the same mindset in terms of adaptation, you know what I mean? Where it's like, all right, now when I was just a little kid with a DSLR camera and I looked at this and I was like, wow, this is insane. Like, how do they do that? But once you get a fundamental understanding of the tactics and techniques that professionals use, then you're like, you just start looking at it in a little bit of a different way.
Yeah. And like you said, it's like, I think the biggest issue with DPs when they start out is it feels like everything is a big mystery. And you go out and you film stuff and it looks good and some of it doesn't and some of it does. And you're like, okay. And then you kind of you naturally gravitate towards the stuff that, is higher contrast, the stuff that has better compositions, but you might not even know why you like the image. Like you might go film on a sunset or, during a sunset, and it's beautiful and it's like your favorite footage you've ever shot. But like, are people really understanding why it's their favorite footage? And I think that's where, again, this is going back to what you're saying. It's like, you can literally just learn these things. It's like there are principles of contrast, like where you can literally reproduce. I'm preaching to the choir here. I know you know this, but you can literally reproduce like good looking images without ever wondering why it's a good looking image. Like you just know. You're like, okay, we need contrast. Like good images come from contrast. Well, how do we build contrast? Or some good images come from being really flat. But is that your statement? Are you trying to make something that's really flat?
Yeah. Well, that's when the fun happens, when you understand lighting and how to achieve certain looks. Yeah. And I've learned that specifically through not so much set stuff, but a lot of the last couple of years, I would just go around with my camera in Venice or anywhere basically around Los Angeles and just figure it out. It doesn't have to be a Hollywood production for you to learn. Like you said, the information's out there. You absorb things, and if you recreate it in your own way, you learn a lot through doing that. Like if I want to have a silhouetted image looking out over the ocean, like how would I achieve that? Where would the sun need to be? How would I think about the lighting and what angle to shoot at and what settings? Yeah, super helpful to just get your hands dirty and just take all the information that's available to you and not only like learn it in your brain, but go out and recreate it,
Yes. And again, that goes back to where our show really was so helpful because, we were able to, in real time, every single day, test this stuff. And I think that's where people get caught up is they're theoretical. And what you said, it's like going out there and just doing it. And you're like, oh, it's not even as complicated as I thought, but that happens while you're doing it and going through the process. So, And again, there's always like, what is that effect where people think they know more, but they don't? I forgot there's a name for it, but there's
something. We can always put it in the description after we think about it.
Yeah.
But
there's
describe
this phenomena. Yeah. Well, it's a phenomena where people think they're really good at something when they're actually not good at something. And the reason why they think they're good at it is because they lack the very skills to know that they're not good. Right. Like the very skills required to know that you're making a mistake are absent. So therefore you don't know you're making a mistake. Right. So there's like this weird paradox catch-22, right? Yeah.
You don't know what you don't know, essentially.
Yeah. And again, it's exactly, it sounds silly, but it's like that actually, I think that, you can trace pretty much every I don't want to say bad decision, but you can trace mistakes back to that.
Well, that's how you learn, right? Is just by doing and then reflecting back, you're like, that was garbage. Oh my God.
Exactly. And just knowing that and feeling it is feeling it is really important. So you're right. Yeah. Practice is important. I firmly believe like if somebody just gets an A7S, right? And I own an ARRI, right? I have an A7. I've got different cameras, but the A7S is like, the thing you shot with it the other day was beautiful. It was great. I mean, you can really, this is what I tell people too. It's like coloring is the same thing. It's the same kind of thing where it's like, if you have a good level of taste and you have good taste in images and you're paying attention to what agencies are doing, you're paying attention to what the cutting edge of filmmakers are doing, and you just start thinking in that way, a lot of these images, like you go on Vimeo, you're like, wow, that looks so cool. How did they do that? How could they possibly think of that? But it's like, okay, well, let's just think about it. Like they had a couple locations. They understand the principles of good lighting. They know how to make a camera move. They know how to put a great lens on. They know how to filter it. They know how to process the image. You could give that same director who shot that an A7S, and they could basically get it to look almost as good, if not as good, depending on the circumstance, as somebody who had an ARRI. And it's not because they had the ARRI, it's because they just had good taste.
Right.
And they understand.
Well, I'm a huge believer that obviously ARRI cameras are insane in terms of specs and capabilities, and there is quality for sure. it's not to excuse that of the camera. And I think at a certain level, you have to step up the gear and all of that. But I'm a huge, huge advocate of knowing the fundamentals of your craft. And it's not so much about the specs of the tool in terms of using the tool wisely. Right. I used to say this thing. It's like kind of a weird example, but so let's say you're a carpenter, right? And you just have a hammer. You still have to be a good carpenter to build an awesome house or something like that. You know what I mean?
Sure. Right. Like it's like you can basically use any hammer, right? You just need, I mean, the utility of the hammer is so insignificant in relation to the actual idea, right? And I think, it's like, that's sort of the power of manifestation, right? It's like, it's like the sandwich just doesn't exist. You have to think of the sandwich and create the sandwich and know that you want to create the sandwich. It's almost like the materials are kind of like subordinate, and I think that is so true about filmmaking. And
I like that analogy too, because it's like the ingredients of the sandwich, right? It's funny to talk about filmmaking like a sandwich, but you get the point where it's like, you need specific ingredients in a particular order and a little bit of, a little bit of seasoning.
Right. And you can have all those ingredients, but if somebody doesn't know how to make a gourmet sandwich with those ingredients, then somebody might not even realize that there could be a sandwich to be made. You know what I mean? So I think, I mean, that's a great analogy, but
I love that.
So that's why I think the A7S is a great camera, and everyone should just buy it. If you want to do it, just buy it.
Honestly,
start using it.
Yeah, honestly. I mean, I do most of my work on an A7 III right now, and it's been treating me well. And if there's any bigger projects, I'll just, rent out or something like that. But one thing I wanted to touch with you is, there's been a lot of good advice on learning and kind of digesting filmmaking as you go and becoming better and better.
Yeah.
What are some specific tips on how to lock in work as a freelancer, or I guess as like a contractor, or whatever you're doing as a DP? How have you been able to stay afloat financially as well throughout the years?
So I'll just say this. I think every DP knows, and I think every director knows, that a lot of their work is not stuff that they would necessarily publish. So it's like, there's a lot of, I think that this is one of the big unspoken things about the industry, and it's kind of like this little underbelly that not a lot of people like to talk about, which is that a lot of people are doing both. They're doing like a little bit of corporate BS kind of like stuff for big corporations. 4 years ago, actually 5 years ago, when I first started out, I was convinced that for the rest of my life, I was just going to be happy being a documentary DP, and I was just totally done. I was good with it. I was like, whatever, I'm making money. But man, after doing that for 4 years, or after doing full screen and doing narrative, and then after getting out of corporate, because it was hard. It was like I had to force myself in that direction. I had to like physically cut off sources of income to make the jump. So this will play into this point in a second, but that is the hardest thing to do, is make the jump from doing just corporate work to doing like the cool Vimeo shit. So there's two ways to work around that. Number one, you can just not, and this, again, these are top DPs that are agencies that I've talked to that tell me this behind closed doors, and I'm not going to name any names, but there are a lot of people that are like, look, I've got 500 plus projects I've worked on in the last 2 years. I only show people 10. I show people 10 because those are the ones that I actually was able to do the way I wanted to, or the ones that I felt good about. Making a statement about what you're going to do and what aesthetic you're bringing. And I think that's really important. And so the number one way to do it is like, get corporate work. Just get whatever work. Do weddings. Do whatever you can do. Do documentary. Just make some money. Get some capital going, right? Once you get that capital, and this is just, you have to do this. You have to take almost 40 to 50% of that capital, and you got to reinvest it. So you got to like say, okay, you have a friend that's a great upcoming music video or music artist or a musical artist, right? Or if you have a friend that's an up and coming comedian or actor, and they maybe have some friends that are actually in the industry, right? You hit them up, you say, hey, let's do a music video. I'll pay for it. And this is where you lose a lot of people. This is where people are like, oh, well, you shouldn't have to do that. It's like, okay, well, I mean, people spend 60 grand on film school, 100 grand in film school, but they don't want to spend 2 grand on a music video that can show everybody what the hell they can do.
Yeah. Well,
and a lot of people do
to that point, I'll let you continue, but just a little sidetrack. That's exactly what I was realizing about a year ago. And my buddy and I developed the Ray-Ban spec ad, and we were just meeting up at coffee shops every Wednesday in Culver City, and we would just say, hey, we want to make something that shows our skill, but also is a potential resume piece to get actual paid work. And so we defined it as like, all right, who are the people that are going to give us money? It's going to be brands. So can we do like what we believe in, what we like aesthetically and storytelling wise, and also like have it basically double as a piece to your resume? And it was all self-funded. Everything in that video was us being like, all right, I'm going to go in $700 on this. You got to go in $700 on this. We need this gear. We need this amount of help from friends. We need to secure this rental location, and it adds up. But money, it comes back. It comes back. What doesn't come back is your time. And that time, if you're using that time to experience things that are building you to your biggest capacity, 100% worth it. You know what I mean? And then you just sit around and you're like, what's next?
Yes, exactly. Dude, see, and that's the thing. It's like when people figure that out, what you figured out, that's when shit starts cooking. Like, and no one's going to give you the keys. Like it's like people who think that are just living in a fantasy world. It just doesn't work like that. Like you have to.
No one's really going to come to you, right? like
no. And
there's like a small portion. There's a small portion of the brain that's like, oh yeah, I post cool Instagram photos. Maybe a Hollywood producer would be like, I like your aesthetic. Like, let's shoot. It's not going to happen.
Yeah. It just doesn't work like that. And I think that, and I think once people realize that, they're under this illusion that it's going to be given to them. It's not. Like you could work at a restaurant for 20 years here and pretend someone's going to give something to you, and it's just not going to happen or it might happen. I'm not trying to crush dreams, but
there is luck out there. There is luck. Yeah.
There's luck. But like, again, like what my mentor told me, it's like, look, you could be really lucky, but if you didn't do the work to develop the skills, like for example, like if you don't do the work to develop the skills, then you won't even, like when that opportunity comes, you won't be ready for it. And that's the problem, is that a lot of people, they put too much faith in like somebody giving it to them. And it's just not how it works. And again, like what happens if you run into Judd Apatow tomorrow, right? When you do talk to them, you're ready. You're ready. You're like, oh, hey, here's my thing. Oh, here's my card. Here's my stuff. If you don't have that, they're like, what are you doing? Because they're looking at it. They know what we know, which is that nothing happens unless you do it. So they're looking at you and they actually judge you.
I remember, oh man, it must be like 2 years ago now. It was like one of my first big commercial shoots that I was second ACing on. So just helping the camera department essentially for a Timex commercial. And
cool.
it was so well done at that point, like in a sense of the production setup. It was something so foreign to me where I took this opportunity. I hopped on an opportunity off of like a Facebook post on a Friday night, and the shoot was sunrise in Lancaster's desert that Saturday. Woo! So I was like, all right, like just hit the ground running. Let's see what happens, And I took a chance, and that was like one of the first shoots that really changed how I think about production, even if it's just commercial work, in terms of doing it properly and all of that. But through that process, I connected with these people on set, and I was definitely underprepared because, like you were saying, like, they ask if someone's showing interest and they're at a certain level, you kind of want to work with them again. And how do you approach that at a person-to-person basis? And whether it's as simple as like following each other on Instagram, or giving them a card or something like that, or saying like, hey, if you ever need any help, like I'll do it cheap just to try to get on their good side, and really just I don't want to say piggyback, but essentially piggyback, because you have to at first.
Oh yeah. That's so smart too. I mean, it's like, that's also the beauty about this industry, is that there's all sorts of gigs where you can go on and you can walk off and you can make a best friend. And that's the beautiful thing about our industry. I mean, hopefully it stays like that, but the idea of being able to just day play and meet people.
I kind of want to wrap it up just for the sake of time, but we'll definitely have to talk again. But I want to ask like one last thing before we put a pin in it.
Yeah.
So you kind of hit on what your future looks like and your past experiences and how you got to where you are. So is there anything that you would want to say to people that are aspiring to become director, a DOP, or someone that is kind of a beginner in a sense of like they're doubting whether they think they can do it, essentially?
I would say, just like you have to do your homework, and you have to pay attention to what is happening in the world. That includes watching. This is all very obvious, but you have to like kind of watch the films, or at least brief yourself of what the films are that are coming out. And you really need to watch what the agencies are doing, and you need to really know these people. You need to know their names, and you need to know who they are. You need to know this kind of stuff. And again, I'm not, I don't know everyone's name, but I try. It's like everyone spends all this time on Instagram surfing and doing stupid stuff. Yeah, well, you could spend that same time surfing and finding out who are doing things. And that's how you kind of learn. So I would just say to people, it's like, yeah, right now is going to be one of the toughest times in this industry's history to get in, given this quarantine and the whole 2-week quarantine pods that they're talking about, which isn't going to work for commercial production. But we'll see. But the idea of like, I think they've already abandoned the quarantine pod idea. I don't know. But the whole thing is like,
let's just imagine that quarantine wasn't really a thing in a more general sense of like, what would you tell people that are trying to commit? They're flirting with the idea of committing to something like this.
Take initiative, make your own stuff, and like and try to figure out what your voice is earlier than later. Number 2, don't scoff at opportunities that seem like they're beneath you, especially if you're not like, if you still have a day job and you're like scoffing at the wedding job, like then you don't deserve it. Like if somebody offers you $1,000 a day or $500 a day to go film their wedding, just go do it. If you're not, do it. Make the money, put it in the bank account. And then when you meet that person at the party that's like an upcoming artist and they just released their album and they're like at the same level as you, you're like, hey, let's make a music video. And they're like, I don't have any money. You're like, oh, let's pay for it. Pick a couple locations. If you've done your homework, you'll know how to do it. And then boom, that's how you start it. And then you just keep doing that kind of thing. And you basically just try to make enough money with a camera as much as you can, or editing. I mean, I edited for years. I still edit sometimes to make money. And so, if you have time, sorry, it was gross. If you have time, yeah, right. If you have time, make sure to just make stuff, and don't wait for somebody to give it to you. That's the biggest thing. Do not wait for somebody to give it to you, because it could never happen. And the idea is, if you're approaching it like you're not waiting, then when somebody does interact with you, they can almost smell it. And then that's when the opportunity would actually hit. So it's like, either way, you just have to take initiative and just assume. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, 100%. I love that.
That goes with everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're right. It's almost like just taking anything that's worked for the industry's best, or not even your industry. It's like, if you look at anyone who is semi-successful, you'll notice there's a work ethic. You'll notice that there's an expertise, and you'll notice that they didn't give up. Right. I love
exactly.
That.
And that's the moral of the story here. So it can happen. Anybody can do it. Just gotta come here, have enough money to survive, and just, I feel like keep in the game.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of it too is just making the decision and then committing,
Yeah. Yeah. And the money, like, unless you're really, really financially, like, unless you're really poor and like you're really in a bad position, which is sad. And I feel sorry for all those people. And I'm talking like really, like you're on boot stamps, you know what I mean? Like really poor, like, then it's really hard. And I'll say it right now. Filmmaking is kind of a rich kid's game. Like, let's just be honest. That's what it is.
It's expensive to facilitate. Yeah.
But that does not mean that some of the greatest filmmakers in history were not like super rich. You know what I mean? And so people say, oh, it's a rich kid's game. It's like, yes and no, right? Yes and no. Yes, you need capital to make stuff happen. Yes, if you're starving, you can't take that wedding job and drop your day job. But if you're able to just stay afloat and just stay doing film, you're gonna end up being kind of okay. Because the world, they need people. They need people. The world needs people.
one thing that's kind of weird, and I don't know if it's just luck or work ethic or whatever. Like, no, there have been times like where, for example, we've been laid off and you don't know when your next check is going to come, but in a weird way, like everything works out, you know?
Yeah. Dude,
it's kind of weird.
That's the thing. And it's the fear. And this sounds really cheesy, but nothing greater to fear than fear itself. And that just sounds so cheesy, but it's true. I mean, it's self-doubt. It's fear of like, oh, well, I'm not going to be able to do this. Like, you just have to do it. And that's what I thought. That's actually, I almost got out of film because of exactly what you're saying. But I said, you know what? There are people who do this. There are people who survive. There's over 800 shows that are being produced at Netflix. Like, am I really that much dumber or not smart enough to be able to do that? No, you're not. If you're a smart person and you feel like you're doing your due diligence, doing the work, it's not even necessarily even about being super smart, right? It's just, did you do the work? And it will end up working out in some fashion. And unless you're a total asshole, total assholes do get pushed out of the industry. If you're really mean and you're just hard to work with and people don't like you, like, that'll get you out faster. You can have all the skills in the world, but if you're a total dick, then so as long as you're not a total dick, as long as you're not always talking behind people's back and being like bitey, and you're a good person, you're fine. Just it'll all work out.
I love that, man. So, way to put a pin in. That's like a, what is it? Alliteration. Put a pin in that.
Oh, it's a tongue twister, dude.
Love it, man.
Way to put a pin. Yeah, it's awesome. Hard.
Well, Santiago, we've been talking for a while. I'll wrap it up, and I just want to thank you for your time, and hope after all this quarantine's over, we can reunite and make something awesome again. And
we will, man. Yeah. So I've got my short film. It's going to debut next Friday. You've seen it. It's called, the title will remain anonymous for now, but you've seen it, and that's going to come out. And then I'll have the link to Trust the Tribeca Film. It's at my website, and you guys can look at my stuff if you want, and just kind of get an idea for what my social media is looking like and how I'm using that as a way to kind of get more work. So yeah,
awesome, man.
But yeah, Andy, thank you, man. This is fun, and I can't wait to see it go live. We'll see it.
Absolutely, I'll keep you in the loop, sir. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, man. Well,
have a good rest of your day, rest of your week, rest of your lonely months in quarantine.
I know, right? I'm going crazy. All right.
Yeah.
See you later, man.
All right. See you, dude.